good.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's written in a very easy, you know, prosaic style, and I love it. So anyway.
Well, thank you very much.
It's great. It's a great book.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You know, when I guess the greatest test for us was when Arnie read it and Watt read it, and Herb and the Lewis brothers, and they all said, "You got mine," and that was meaningful to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's great. Well, just FYI, Josh, since you're probably familiar with the people at the news, I was a contemporary of Dirk Facers at the Chronic.
Oh yeah.
Utah. Yeah.
That's not, yeah, Dirk, I see him a couple times a week.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. Yeah,
You know
Dirk was my sports editor at Chronic.
We had talked about a signing on Saturday.
Right.
But let's not mention it online because we're thinking, you know, that I don't know that they. Yeah.
We're going to go on in about 7 minutes.
Well, you said 6.
Yeah, you know, I thought that was kind of odd. I mean, isn't Lin Chinese? So, you know, mixing the two together, I mean, it makes more sense to ask Yao Ming than Watt Masaka, you know. Although, honestly, I really want to go into the Watt story as well, so we'll save a lot of that for the little bit.
Watt is so fun, so reasonable, so shy. We had an opportunity to go tell people they talk about this.
Oh, really? You know,
doesn't seem to line my well.
you mentioned one of his friends, George.
Yoshioka.
Say again?
Yoshioka?
No. When he went to Weber State with
Shimizu.
Shimizu. Yeah. My family knows the Shimizu. We know the Shimizu.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So, and my father followed your father at Ogden and followed Watt to Weber, and then to you.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
that's awesome.
so it was like a walk back in time because I'm from Ogden. So.
Where are you based?
South Ogden.
So how old are you?
I am 44.
Can't relate to one of my kids.
Yeah, I'm actually the 3rd generation. So.
That's a mine.
Yeah.
3rd generation Ogden Agri.
Oh, really? You went to Ogden too?
I did.
I went to Bonnie.
I did too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Probably because we had the better team, right?
Yeah, we did.
Well, like I say, my father's an Ogden High grad too, so.
How old is your father?
He will be 40, so 62.
Did he say 62, Trace?
70.
Oh, 72.
By the Red Zone stores in Sandy, Salt Lake City, and Layton, Utah. Get all of your Utah Utes merchandise at any of their 3 locations. Call the Sandy store at 861-523-9173 or go online to uredzone.com. I'm Raven, and tonight we are fortunate to welcome the authors of a new book about Utah sports, Trace and Josh Barrett. Their book, Blitz Kids, details the lives of players who would become part of Utah's only NCAA tournament winning team, the 1944 champions. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Thank you for having us.
I'm glad to be here.
All right. Well, you know, Josh, when you or you got the idea to start the book, how exactly did that unfold?
One night, a few years back, I was at home and my wife and I had just watched Glory Road, another great basketball. And I knew the stories of my grandfather. I had heard them for years. And they weighed very heavily on me.
Oh, okay. I'll tell
And
you.
Arnie's
If I
a
can.
very tall guy,
Okay.
and he casts a very long shadow. And I grew up not being able to dribble basketball and contagion. So I think in that night, I figured out my role was to be that of the story. That I could be the one to capture the story before it was forgotten and put it down on paper so that my kids would be able to do it. And I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I asked my dad.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Glory Road, because that was a movie where Utah should have been involved, but the movie was not. Right. Because, of course, Texas Western beat Utah in the quarterfinals.
Yeah.
Or, excuse me, in the semis. Now, you mentioned right early in the book that you grew up with a father who told some great stories. So, you know, what did you tell him all about his grandfather?
Well, it became family legend, you know, what Arnie did and the team did. And Arnie's kind of a wild person, doesn't really promote what he did. So a lot of what I would hear and relate to my kids was that we already tell other people the stories, but we really didn't have any idea. Not until we started to research the story ourselves and getting an interview players and research the newspaper articles about what the story was. I didn't know. I had lived with Arnie for a lifetime, and I didn't know how great and dramatic the story was. So, you know, I think just being around Arnie and knowing Watt and some of the other players, yeah, we hear bits and pieces, but we didn't know it all.
So, when you came to your father with this idea, you know, how did things get rolling?
Well, we thought we needed to ask their permission first.
Sure.
I kind of looked at this group of men as elder statesmen, and I wanted to do their story justice. I didn't want to give it up. And so we called Arnie and asked him if it would be okay. We called him and his teammates. And then we just got busy writing. I lived in Nevada at the time, and Trace lived here in Ogden. So I would stay up late at night with my newborn son in one hand and typing with the other hand, lulling him to sleep. And then Trace would get up in the morning and look over what I had written, and we would go back and forth and call and share articles that we found. A lot of that, you're never going to believe what I read today, or I had this interview with so-and-so, and found out the craziest thing. And we just kind of worked it together.
Well, I want you to definitely hold up the book for our viewers to see. You know, Utes fans, I have read through this book, and I have been a fan of Utah basketball for a long, long time. And for anyone who is a fan of Utah basketball or Utah sports, this is a book you cannot miss. It's written in a very nice, easy, prosaic style that kind of really sucks you into the story of all of the players and their eventual run to the 1944 championships. But it's more than that, because you go into not only their lives early on, but you kind of, it's not just a what did they do then, but it also kind of a where are they now kind of thing. So, you know, it was really a great retrospective on a team, its players, who they were, and the time. Did you have any sort of focus when you started to write the book? Anything you wanted to accomplish?
We wanted to just tell the story. It's always been in story form to me. We were asked by one person who read it, another writer, why we didn't write it as a documentary. It's always been a story. We wanted to get it right.
That's not a bad idea, because this was so well written.
Thank you, thank you. And, you know, so we wanted to get it right. We wanted to make sure it told the story. We felt like all along people would like the book if they knew the players. Interesting stories. Players had interesting stories, interesting lives. So that's kind of the approach we took.
Well, let me start out for Utah fans by saying there was one bit of information that I didn't know, and it was right in the front of the book. It was the first thing that comes up. I did not know. I knew that Utah had taken the place of a team that bowed out of the 1944 NCAA tournament. I did not know why. And that was a very powerful start of the book. It was brilliantly placed in the book. You started out by talking about, Josh, why don't you take it from there?
Well, we had heard rumors and bits and pieces about what had happened. And it's interesting because the Utes did reach the pinnacle of the sport. They were the greatest team in the country. But we didn't understand that a tragedy, a true tragedy, opened the door for them to make it all the way to the championship. And we started the book telling the story of the coach from Arkansas. And his team was in a rather tragic accident. The two starters had horrendous leg injuries. One had to have a leg amputated. And a faculty member from the university died in the accident. And he had to take his players' amputated leg, and they asked him to go bury it in the field. And to me, this coach who's got all his hopes and his dreams for his kids and his team, it was him burying those things, and it must have been just heartbreaking. I don't think the players knew for years and years and years really what a tragic thing happened to allow them to get to the championship.
Well, and our producer right there, his eyes are as big as sausage right now, because obviously he didn't know what it was about. And honestly, it was an incredibly powerful beginning to this book. It not only told why Utah got into the tournament, how that opening happened, but it really told you what Arkansas went through, which was, like you say, it was a horrible tragedy.
It's isn't it?
It is. It is. It was, again, terrific opening to the book. And I really, I'm trying to stay away from telling everybody what happens in the book and playing the spoiler because it's just so well written. Utes fans, definitely pick up this book. You talked about the players, and you talked off the air about the incredible stories behind the team. Wat Misaka was one of the primary players in the team, and you track him from growing up in Ogden, Utah, on 25th Street. I'm from Ogden, and 25th Street right now is as you know, Trace, it's more like a tourist attraction than anything. I mean, they've sort of renovated it and kept that sort of 1940s look to it. In fact, it's even appeared as a prop in many movies.
It has.
And you broke down. Actually, it taught me a little bit about the beginnings of 25th Street and Ogden and so forth. But you track Watt from his growing up as a Japanese American, first generation American. But he grows up and comes to his athletic maturation in 1940s America. At about the time of bombing of Pearl Harbor. Talk about what it was like to talk with Watt about that period.
One of the things that was really interesting to me is Watt is a very dignified person. He's a very kind man. He's not one to promote himself. And it was, as we said to Watt, we'd like to interview you for this story. He looked at us and said, we'll see. Because I think, it was a difficult time. And I'm not sure that he wanted to share that story because it's personal.
Mm-hmm.
And he grew up in a situation, he lived under Tona Restaurant.
Right.
There's a Japanese restaurant there now, a sushi restaurant, with dirt walls and dirt floors. And so I think that maybe was a hard thing, but to sit and interview one about that and to understand what he has become and what he's accomplished, tore down barriers. And he'll never tell you, but it was an honor to talk to him on that.
I think it's really compelling that in 1944, when there were over 100,000 American citizens who were interred in camps throughout the country, here's a Japanese American kid playing basketball in Madison Square Garden to a crowd of thousands of people who are cheering.
During World War II.
During World War II.
I mean, there's fighting going on in the Pacific, and a Japanese American is playing in Madison Square Garden for the NCAA championship.
And the fans love him. Stand and cheer for Watt.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about how he somehow has been kind of roped into the insanity, if you will. which really doesn't make any sense. Because Utes fans, I mean, seriously, the story of Wapnesaka is far beyond anything that insanity could even conjure up. And, you know, I love that you put that in, and I mentioned this off the air, but I love that you put in that he went through some very serious racism, just trying to make it to college, really. You know, that his parents came from Japan, and that he grew up as a first-generation American, and then, you know, no fault of his own, you know, his parents' country attacks his country. You know, I mean, you know, what a tough thing for a kid growing up.
I think it's also a testament to these players that in World War II, when racial slurs were in headlines in daily newspapers, these guys were team. They didn't see him as anybody different. He was just another member of the team. And I think the way that they bonded, the friendships they had, were way beyond their years.
Well, and another thing I really liked about the book is how you contrasted his life growing up as a, you know, non-white American sort of poor kid with Arnie's upper crust upbringing, white American. And, you know, it was a really, I love that part, how you had contrasted that. So, Arnie was cut from his junior high school team.
Can you believe that?
Okay.
6'4" kid.
See, that's it. Seriously, I'm reading through this and I am laughing. I'm laughing, and my wife says to me, you know, what are you laughing at? And I said, a 6'4" kid in 1940 getting cut from any team?
Yeah. It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah. So, you know, so talk a little bit about what happened there.
Well, you know, the coach actually had some other interests and was going to step out of coaching midway through the year. And what he ended up doing was just taking the players who had played for him the year before. Arnie didn't stand a chance, even though he was 6'4" and a pretty darn good athlete. The interesting thing that happened is he got cut from the team, and a month or so later shows up at school. The interesting thing is, the new coach was a fellow by the name of Bill Kinner, a former All-American from the University of Utah, who recognized, you know, you don't cut a 6'4" kid who can shoot the ball like crazy, dribble with both hands, and then be in the 9th grade. So he invited him to come out to the team.
Well, see, and that was another thing that I thought was was phenomenal. 6'4" in the 9th grade?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I wish those genes had passed down.
Wow. They skipped me too.
Yeah, and in the 1940s, I mean, 6'4" is like 7 foot, almost these days.
So he decorated his career at Ogden High, and then he's not recruited by Utah. It's very possible that he could have been a legend for the non-BCS team down south. That was the only team that recruited him.
I don't think we should speak such blasphemy.
I mean, honestly, it's shocking. But I'm reading through this, and that's why I say, Utes fans, you've got to pick up this book because there's a lot of really good information. So yeah, I mean, he was only recruited by the evil empire, if you will. Talk about how he ended up in Utah. Go ahead.
I think it is interesting, and the players talk about this, how that really none of them were recruited. The team that rose to the championship, they all just showed up at the university. And Arnie was, he had a note from the coach at the time, Dale Pearson, his brother, who was an administrator at Ogden High, and walked into to Vadel's office and handed a note to him. And as we've told this in the book, Vadel's first question was, do you have your own shoes? Because of wartime restrictions on rubber, if they didn't have their own shoes, the university couldn't provide it for them. So they had to bring, you know, they didn't have a gym to play in because it had been, the Army had taken over the Einar Nielsen field house and filled it with barracks. No shoes, no place to play, and you know, somehow they bring this all together. It's just amazing.
And the first part of the 1944 season, they play in the girls' gym.
Girls' gym.
Yeah, and that's another thing that, you know, for anybody who is a history buff or just likes a good backstory even. I mean, the fact that World War II swirls around this team, you know, from Watts being, you know, Japanese American to the fact that they can't play in Iron Unison Fieldhouse because it's being overrun by the Army. It's being turned into a barracks. That new places are springing up, Hill Field and the Defense Depot Ogden at the time. You know, it's such a great story for the team. You know, I love it. So Arnie comes to play for Vadel Peterson, one of the most talked about, you know, former coaches in Utah history, and they obviously have a very good season with Watt and Arnie. Watt comes from Weber College and transfers up to Utah. Talk about the 1944 NIT tournament, because they weren't in the NCAA tournament. They had an opportunity to go, you know, to the big tournament at the time was the NIT tournament.
It was.
And they get invited to the NIT, and what happens?
Well, you know, they had an opportunity to go to the NCAA.
Sure.
They turned it down.
Right.
Arnie and Fred Sheffield were the only two players on the team who'd been to New York. And there was a financial incentive to go to the NIT as well because they guaranteed them some money to help pay expenses. And they wanted to see New York, probably primarily. And, you know, so season's over, they load players onto the train. Vadel is adamant about making sure they have their shoes and the jockstraps. And because if they don't have them, they can't play.
I love this part. Keep going.
So they get to Chicago, and Vadel in charge of this Foot Locker with all things rubber in it, including shoes and jockstraps. He forgets it and leaves it in Chicago. They get to New York, first practice game against Oklahoma, and they don't have shoes. They don't have jockstraps. So I had to borrow them from another team in order to play that first game. And so yeah, different time, different place.
Oh, you know, and it's great to see that, you know, there are all kinds of things that happen to this team along the way.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, from the tragedy of Arkansas to losing their luggage, if you will, before the first game. You know, it's great. And then, of course, they get bounced by Kentucky in the first round.
First round.
So when you were talking to Arnie, you know, what did he say about being bounced out of the tournament and then Vadel coming to them and saying, hey, we've got another opportunity?
You know, they all loved the game. And most of them were going into the service shortly after they were to. So for them, this was the end.
Right.
Their last chance to do that. And Vadel, as far as we can tell, did not think it was a good idea to accept the invitation to the NCAA tournament.
Right.
Because they'd have to go back to Kansas City. And if they lost in Kansas City, then they didn't get to go on their sightseeing tour of New York. And he wanted to give that to them.
Which was the whole point of the NIT.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. I
The
think
apple.
that's what he wanted for them to be able to do before they got into the service. But they wanted to play ball. They felt like they should have won the Kentucky. They felt like they were better. And they didn't even think twice about it. And they overruled Vadel. They got them to train them up.
So they get bounced out of the tournament by Adolph Rupp's Kentucky team. And they got an opportunity to go sightseeing in New York for a few days. Or, again, this tragedy happens to the team in Arkansas after a tune-up game prior to the tournament. And they were a potential favorite for the tournament. So Vadel comes to the team and says, we've got an opportunity, and they vote to go. So they go to the tournament. And, I mean, obviously, we're talking about the team that won the 1944 championship, so they obviously won the tournament. But, folks, I am not going to spoil the ultimate one because there's, you know, this is a team that won the 1944 championship. It's the only NCAA championship in Utah history, but they are probably the only team to do something else. And I'm not going to spoil that for those of you who don't know. You've got to pick up the book. So Utah, you mentioned that the greatest accolade you received was after you finished the book. and the players, Arnie, Watt, and some of the other guys were in there. Talk a little bit about that.
You know, that was it. The Lewis brothers, one of them lives in California, one in Arizona. They both called me and said he had sent them a copy of the book and it was done. And they said it was outstanding. He said, you got it right. And, you know, when you're two people attempting to write a story about someone else, they can be your harshest critic. And then for them to say to us, you got it right, that was really rewarding for us, to know that they were pleased with the result. And it probably meant as much to me as anything. So, yeah, that's what it meant to me.
We didn't take the burden of this story lightly. As you said, Arnie is one of the most storied athletes in university history and has been named one of the 100 most important basketball players in college basketball history. Watt was the first minority to play in a championship game and also to be drafted
Into the NBA. That's right.
This is really important stuff. And we felt a great obligation to do the university and these elder statesmen justice.
Well, and I think you absolutely did. You know, hold that up one more time. Utes fans, you've got to get a hold of Utes Blitz because, as was mentioned, Josh and Trace got it right. So we're gonna take a little bit of a break, and we're gonna come back in just a little bit with Arnie Farron himself. Claire? Okay.
Hey, thank you. What a fun thing.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here.
I mean, obviously, you'll want to probably stick around for us
Yeah.
to talk about.